Jack knew that this trip would be different the moment the sun disappeared over the horizon, leaving only the dark vastness of the desert around him. The truck's lights cut through the darkness like two luminous razors, but they were not enough to dispel the feeling of isolation. The road seemed to stretch on forever, with no curves, no signs, no life. It was as if he were driving towards nothing. The hours passed, and fatigue began to weigh on his shoulders. He had left a warehouse in Phoenix late, transporting an urgent load bound for El Paso. The promise of a fat bonus for the delivery had motivated him, but now, surrounded only by emptiness and the monotonous sound of the engine, he began to wonder if it was worth it. The road, once busy, seemed increasingly deserted, as if the entire world had dissolved into the horizon. His GPS, which was his only reliable companion, began to fail. The screen flickered, the route disappeared, and a strange message appeared. No signal. He tried to tune the radio to hear anything that would break the oppressive silence, but all he could find was static. It was as if he had crossed an invisible border into a place where nothing worked as it should. That was when he saw the neon sign. First a faint glow on the horizon, then the words, Sunset Motel, blinking in the darkness. Some letters faded and others flickering. The sign seemed out of place, a relic of times gone by. There was something uncomfortable about it, but Jack knew he had to stop. His eyes were heavy, and driving any further would be suicide. He parked the truck in what appeared to be the motel's parking lot. It was small, with only a few spaces, and most of them were empty. Only one old, rusty car occupied the far corner, covered in dust. When Jack turned off the engine, silence fell over him like a wall. The only thing that moved was the sign, pulsing in time with its unsettling breathing. Jack hesitated for a moment before getting out of the truck. Something in his mind was screaming at him to keep driving, but his body had already made up its mind. He needed to rest, and this was the only place where he seemed to be able to do that. The reception door creaked loudly as Jack pushed it open. The sound echoed in the small space, breaking the oppressive silence. The room was lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, which swayed slightly, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The smell of mold and old wood overwhelmed his senses. The reception desk, made of material that looked like it had seen better days, was covered in dust, except for a small golden bell in the center, gleaming as if someone had recently polished it. Jack hesitated before ringing the bell, but he did. The metallic sound reverberated, and almost immediately, a door at the back of the desk opened, revealing an elderly woman. She moved slowly, almost shuffling her feet. Her skin looked too pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were slightly sunken, as if she hadn't slept in years. "Welcome to the Sunset Motel," she said in a husky but surprisingly gentle voice. Her smile, however, seemed forced, as if it were more a habit than an expression of happiness. "I need a room for the night," Jack replied, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in his belly. The woman picked up an old registration book, her thin, wrinkled fingers turning the yellowed pages until she found a blank one. "Room 6, she said, handing over a heavy key with a brass keyring that looked like it belonged to another time. Before Jack could thank her, she added, "Be careful not to wake the other guests." Jack frowned. "Other guests?" He looked around and saw no one, not even any signs of recent occupancy. She didn't answer, just gave him an enigmatic smile and walked back to the door she had come from, closing it behind her. Jack stood there for a moment, holding the key and trying to process what had just happened. He walked out of the reception area, down the hallway that led to the rooms. The walls were covered in faded, peeling wallpaper, and the carpet creaked beneath his feet. Each step seemed amplified in the silence. He reached the door marked number 6. There were scratches in the wood, as if someone had tried to force their way in or out of it. When he opened the door, the musty smell was even stronger, mixed with something metallic and sweet that he couldn't identify. The room was small, with a double bed, a nightstand, and a flickering bedside lamp. Jack felt a shiver run through him, but told himself it was just exhaustion. He locked the door behind him and threw himself onto the bed, ignoring the discomfort and trying to rest. Jack threw himself onto the bed with a heavy sigh, feeling the mattress sink in more than it should have. The musty smell was stronger here, permeating the sheets and pillow. He tried to ignore the discomfort, but he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong in this place. The silence was overwhelming, except for the intermittent sound of the lamp on the nightstand, which flickered in an irregular rhythm, as if it were struggling to stay on. He looked around, examining the room. The walls of the room were covered in faded wallpaper, with floral patterns that had long since lost their color. In the corner of the ceiling, patches of moisture formed strange shapes, almost like deformed faces watching him. The mirror above the dresser was small and cracked on the right corner, but it reflected more than necessary. He could see the hallway through the crack in the poorly closed door, something he swore he had locked when he entered. A shiver ran down his spine when he heard a sound coming from the bathroom. It was a steady drip, but the shower seemed dry when he entered the room. He stood up slowly and walked to the bathroom door, which was ajar. The light inside wavered like the one in the bedroom, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Jack cautiously opened the door and turned on the light. The dripping stopped immediately. The bathroom was empty, but he felt like he wasn't alone. Back in the room, he closed the bathroom door and climbed back into bed. Exhaustion was starting to get to him, but the discomfort kept him alert. He picked up his phone to check the time, but the screen was blank, and nothing he did seemed to bring it back. He put the device down and saw something strange. In the reflection of the cracked mirror, a shadow was moving down the hallway. He turned quickly to look out the door, but the hallway was empty. Jack decided it was just his mind playing tricks on him because of the fatigue. He lay back down, this time with his back against the headboard, keeping his eyes fixed on the door. The clock on the nightstand read 1:45 a.m., and the second hand seemed slower than usual, as if time were slowing down. When he finally closed his eyes, a distinct sound echoed through the room. 3 soft knocks on the wall. He opened his eyes instantly, his heart racing. At first, he thought it might be another guest, but then he remembered the woman at the front desk saying, "Be careful not to wake the other guests." Who else could be there? The knocking continued, louder this time, as if something was on the other side of the wall trying to break through. Jack got up from the bed, and the clock flashed exactly 3 a.m. He felt the air in the room grow heavier, and the lamp on the nightstand went out completely, plunging him into darkness. Jack stood still for a moment, his heart beating like an uncontrolled drum. The darkness was oppressive, and the silence was absolute. He reached for the bedside lamp, trying to turn it back on, but it remained inert. The only sound he could hear was his own breathing and the soft creak of the wood beneath his feet as he stood up. The bedroom door, which he had locked, was now open. The dim light from the hallway filtered in, creating a pale rectangle in the darkness of the room. Jack hesitated, but something in his mind told him he had to get out of there. Even without understanding what was happening, he felt that staying in that room would be even worse. As he crossed the threshold, the hallway looked different. The walls were darker, with the wallpaper completely peeling off in some places, revealing rotting wood behind. The carpet, which had been worn before, was now wet beneath his feet, making a soggy sound with each step. He looked back, but room 6 had disappeared. Where there had been a door, there was now only a bare wall. Jack began walking, trying to keep his cool. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, and every door he passed was closed, some with scratch marks and others with broken locks. He tried to open one of the doors, but the doorknob was cold and still, as if it were part of the wall. The silence was interrupted occasionally by whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. As he walked, Jack noticed something even more disturbing. The hallway was not linear. He could have sworn he had walked down this same stretch before. The stains on the carpet, the cracks in the walls, everything was identical. He tried to mark one of the doors with a coin he had in his pocket, scratching an X in the wood. But a few minutes later, he passed the same X again. Panic began to take over. Jack quickened his pace, almost running, but the hallway seemed to play tricks on him. The doors began to shake slightly, as if something was trying to get out. He felt like he was being watched, but when he turned around, there was nothing but emptiness. It was then that he saw an open door in the distance, the only one different in that repetitive maze. A dim light escaped from inside, dancing like a candle flame. With no other choice, he walked towards it. The room seemed larger than it should have been, with old furniture covered in sheets and an open diary on a table in the center. Jack walked in slowly, feeling the air grow even heavier, and closed the door behind him. The moment he crossed the threshold, the whispers stopped. The silence was absolute, but it offered no comfort. The only thing that seemed to matter now was the diary on the table waiting for him. Jack approached the desk hesitantly, his footsteps echoing faintly on the worn wooden floor. The journal seemed unusually intact, considering the state of decay of the surroundings. The cover was worn leather, and the edges of the pages were yellowed, but the title engraved in gold letters was still legible. Tales of the End. Jack felt a chill as he touched the object, as if something alive were inside it. He opened the journal and found pages filled with hurried, uneven handwriting, as if written under intense anxiety. Each entry began with a name and a date, followed by detailed accounts of the experiences of people who had apparently also been trapped in the motel. Most disturbingly, none of the entries mentioned a way out. One entry in particular caught his eye. Richard Haynes, March 23, 1987. The text described a story similar to Jack's. A weary traveler, a strange receptionist, an uncomfortable room, and eventually the same feeling of being trapped in an endless hallway. Richard wrote that at first he tried to escape logically, but soon realized that the motel was alive. Each attempt to leave only led him deeper into his prison. "The motel is a parasite," read a sentence underlined in red. "It feeds on fear and despair. The more we try to escape, the stronger it becomes." Jack frantically flipped through the pages, searching for any sign of a way out, but each story ended abruptly, with the author succumbing to terror. Some had tried to confront what they called the entity that ruled the motel, but their fates remained unknown. Others had simply disappeared, leaving only incomplete fragments of their stories. It was then that he found the last completed page. It was different from the others, as if it had been written recently. The ink still looked fresh, slightly staining his fingers. To his surprise, the entry was signed with his own name, Jack Carter, February 3, 2025. His heart raced, and he read the first few lines, which described exactly what he had done since arriving at the motel. Every movement, every thought, up until that moment. The last line, however, was blank, as if waiting for him to complete it. Jack put the diary down and took a step back. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a deep, guttural sound coming from all sides, like the rumble of something gigantic awakening. The walls began to shake, and he felt the air become even heavier, almost impossible to breathe. Without thinking, he opened the bedroom door to escape, but what he saw on the other side was even worse. The hallway had disappeared, replaced by a pulsing darkness, as if the void itself was calling him. He knew he couldn't stay still. Something was coming for him, and the diary still awaited his completion. Jack stood in the doorway, staring into the darkness that seemed alive, like a sea of shadows in constant movement. The guttural sound that had been distant before now seemed to be all around him, whispering in a language he didn't recognize. He turned quickly to pick up the diary, but it was no longer on the table. Where it had once rested, only ashes. It emerged slowly from the darkness, a shapeless figure made of shadows like a cloud of dense smoke, but with grotesque human features. Contorted faces emerged from the black surface, their eyes fixed on Jack, and mouths opened in silent screams. Each movement of the entity seemed accompanied by a creaking sound, like wood being crushed under pressure. "You're late, Jack," the voice rang out, but it didn't come from anywhere. It was as if it were whispered directly into his head, reverberating through his bones. But everyone does eventually. Jack took a step back, trying to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. He felt his mind begin to fragment, as if the entity was ripping out his memories, his emotions, and replacing them with pure despair. He tried to turn to run away, but his feet were stuck to the ground, as if the floor had turned to concrete. "You know what's trapped here, don't you? It's not the body, Jack. It's the soul," the voice said, as one of the shadows took the form of a face identical to Jack's, but with black, empty eyes. "That's how we survive. We feed on everything you are." With a superhuman effort, Jack screamed, finally breaking the silence that was suffocating him. He fought against the force that held him prisoner, trying desperately to retreat. his eyes fixed on something glinting in the corner of the room. The key to room 6, the same one the receptionist had given him. He didn't know how, but he felt like this was his only chance. Jack lunged forward, reaching out and grabbing the key. As soon as his fingers touched the cold metal, the entity recoiled, its distorted faces screaming in fury. The room began to shake violently, the shadows dissipating like smoke in the wind. With the key in hand, Jack ran for the door, and for the first time, found no darkness on the other side. Instead, the hallway reappeared, but it felt different, less hostile, as if something had changed. Without a second thought, he ran, each step echoing like thunder. Behind him, the sound of the entity raging filled the air, but he didn't look back. When he finally reached the reception area, it was empty. The woman who had once seemed omnipresent had disappeared. The motel's front door was open, and beyond it, Jack could see the faint light of dawn on the horizon. He ran outside, breathing in the fresh air and stumbling to his truck, which was still parked. He started the engine with shaking hands and sped off, leaving the Sunset Motel behind. In the rearview mirror, he saw the neon sign flash one last time before it went out completely. But the silence inside the truck's cabin was not comforting. Something inside Jack told him he hadn't really escaped. The sun was already rising when Jack finally reached a busier stretch of highway. He kept his hands steady on the steering wheel, though they still shook slightly. The truck's engine roared as usual, but to Jack the sound seemed distant, muffled, as if he were still caught in some kind of trance. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the motel looming over the horizon again, but all there was the emptiness of the desert. He forced himself to believe that he was safe now, that all of this was behind him. But even as the sky grew lighter, the feeling of something watching him wouldn't leave him. On the passenger seat, the key to room 6 gleamed in the sunlight. He didn't remember taking it, but there it was, a grim reminder of what had happened. Jack reached out to throw it out the window, but as he touched it, a wave of memories hit him. The faces in the darkness, the diary that had already predicted his arrival, and the voice of the entity that still whispered inside his head. The radio, which had been off until then, turned on by itself. Static filled the cabin, followed by an old melancholy song that seemed to belong to another time. Jack turned the knobs frantically to turn it off, but the sound persisted. Then, in the middle of the song, he heard a voice. "You never really leave, Jack." He braked sharply on the shoulder, the truck skidding slightly before coming to a stop. The radio finally went silent, but the air felt heavier than ever. Jack climbed out of the vehicle, feeling the desert heat increase. He looked back again and his heart stopped for a moment. In the distance, just on the edge of the horizon, the neon sign blinked. Sunset Motel. The same faded, flickering letters. He knew it made no sense. He had driven for hours, away from this place. And yet there it was, like a warning, like a promise. Jack got back into his truck, determined to keep going and never look back. The engine roared again, and he drove away, faster than before. But as he disappeared down the road, the sign continued to blink on the horizon, as if patiently waiting for its next victim. The Sunset Motel needed no hurry. He knew that sooner or later, another weary traveler would see the sign and make the same decision Jack had made. And so the cycle of terror would continue, night after night. And if you've made it this far, prove you're not afraid of the unknown. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And remember, on the next turn, terror might be waiting for you. Welcome to Asphalt Horror.